Right, let's talk about the US economy in this glorious year of 2025. Now I know what you're thinking, oh god, not economics. But stick with me because there's a rather unsettling hum coming from the engine room of the American dream, and it's getting harder to ignore. For a while there, things might have seemed, if not exactly rosy, then at least not actively on fire. We muddled through as one does, but lately the warning lights on the dashboard have started blinking with a bit more urgency. We're seeing signs that suggest the economic waters might be getting choppier than a North Atlantic gale. Think rising prices, wobbly job markets, and a national debt figure that looks like it's been training for an Olympic weightlifting competition and winning. This isn't just academic, it's about your life. It's about whether you can afford your weekly shop without having to sell a kidney, or whether the dream of owning a home is starting to feel as fantastical as riding a unicorn to work. These are the bread and butter issues, quite literally, that determine the quality of life for millions. The shocking truth isn't some grand conspiracy. It's simply that the foundations might be a bit more precarious than the people in shiny suits on television would have you believe. There's a disconnect between the everything's fine, nothing to see here brigade and the lived reality for a growing number of people. So let's put on our waders because we're about to step into the slightly murky waters of the current US economic situation. It might not be pretty, but looking away won't make the problems disappear, it just makes them sneak up on you, which is frankly rude. Alright, let's get down to brass tacks, or as economists call them, leading indicators. First up is the gross domestic product, or GDP. Think of it as the country's overall economic performance review. If it's going up, generally that's good. If it's going down, well, that's when you start hearing words like contraction and recession. And guess what? The latest figures for the first quarter of 2025 showed the US GDP actually decreased by 0.2%. Now, why did the economy decide to take a little nap, you ask? Weaker consumer spending played a part. People weren't splashing the cash as much. There was also a larger trade impact, with an increase in imports and a decrease in government spending. Despite this, a measure of domestic demand did actually increase, which just shows how wonderfully confusing economics can be. Then there's the national debt. This is the colossal amount of money the US government owes. Imagine your credit card bill, but instead of a few hundred quid for that ill-advised online shopping spree, it's trillions. This isn't just an abstract number. A massive debt means more of your tax money goes to paying interest, rather than, say, fixing bridges or funding schools. It also limits the government's ability to respond to future crises. It's a giant financial anchor, basically. And it's not just us saying things look a bit iffy. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has also downgraded its growth predictions for the US. They trimmed the forecast for 2025 down from 2.7% to 1.8%. And looking ahead to 2026, they've nudged it down again to 1.7%. So even the big international brains are saying, yeah, America, you might want to brace yourself for a bit of a slowdown. Let's talk about inflation, that sneaky little thief that makes your money worth less over time. In the first quarter of 2025, the Personal Consumption Expenditures, PCE price index, went up by 3.6%. That's a fair old jump from the 2.4% increase we saw at the end of last year. Economists often look at core inflation, which strips out food and energy prices. The core PCE price index also rose, hitting 3.5% in Q1 2025. The Federal Reserve has a target for inflation around 2%. Well, we're currently quite a bit above that. So, what does this mean for you? It means your weekly grocery bill is probably making your eyes water more than usual. Filling up the car with petrol feels like an act of financial self-harm. And if you're renting, you might be looking at your landlord with a mixture of fear and suspicion every time the lease renewal comes around. It's the everyday essentials that are hitting hardest, the things you simply can't do without. It's a constant squeeze, making it harder to make ends meet, let alone save for a rainy day or a sunny holiday. This erosion of purchasing power has a nasty knock-on effect. It eats away at your savings. If your money in the bank is earning less interest than the rate of inflation, you're effectively losing money just by leaving it there. Planning for the future becomes a guessing game. How much will you need for retirement when prices are this unpredictable? It's particularly tough for people on fixed incomes like pensioners or those on lower wages who don't have much wiggle room in their budgets to begin with. It's like trying to run a marathon with weights tied to your ankles, and the finish line keeps moving further away. The housing market. That cornerstone of the American dream, which for many is starting to feel more like a recurring nightmare. The question on everyone's lips, especially if they're under 40 and don't happen to be a tech billionaire, is, can I ever afford a place to live that isn't my parents' spare room? The anxiety around housing is palpable. It's thicker than a dodgy landlord's paint job over damp patches. Several factors are conspiring to make housing a particularly thorny issue right now. Prices in many areas remain stubbornly high, defying gravity and common sense. Then there's the specter of interest rates. Higher rates mean more expensive mortgages, pushing homeownership even further out of reach for first-time buyers. This isn't just an economic problem, it's a social one. The dream of owning your own home has been a powerful motivator for generations. It represents stability, security, a stake in your community. When that dream becomes unattainable for a large swath of the population, it breeds frustration and a sense of being left behind. Young people, in particular, are finding themselves locked out of a market that their parents and grandparents took for granted. The goalposts haven't just moved, they've been airlifted to a different planet, one where only the super rich can afford the landing fees. And a wobbly housing market is bad news for everyone, not just aspiring homeowners. It's a critical sector of the economy. If it catches a cold, the rest of the economy can get pneumonia. We've seen before how a housing downturn can trigger wider financial chaos. So, when people start whispering about bubbles and corrections, it's not just idle chatter. It's a sign that the foundations might be less solid than we'd like. It's like discovering the foundations of your house are made of digestive biscuits. Looks fine on the surface, but you wouldn't want a heavy rain shower. So, keep an eye on those housing prices because they might just be the canary in the coal mine. Section 5, 2007 all over again. Spotting the ghosts of bubbles past. Now whenever the housing market starts looking a bit frothy, people inevitably start muttering the dreaded year 2007. Yes, that delightful period when the global financial system decided to impersonate an exploding clown car. Largely thanks to a US housing bubble that went spectacularly pop. The trauma of that crash is still etched into the collective memory, like a really bad tattoo you got on holiday. So, the big question is, are we staring down the barrel of a similar catastrophe? Is this 2007 the sequel nobody asked for? It's tempting to draw direct parallels. We have high house prices, and affordability is a massive issue. People are stretching their finances to the limit to get on the property ladder. However, it's crucial to note what might be different this time. After 2008, there were some new regulations put in place designed to prevent the kind of reckless lending that fueled the last crisis. So the ninja loans, no income, no job, no assets, are hopefully a thing of the past, or at least a much rarer species of financial idiocy. But are current safeguards enough? That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, isn't it? One potential difference could be the underlying cause of the high prices. Back in the mid-2000s, a lot of it was driven by speculative frenzy and incredibly loose credit. Today, while speculation certainly exists, there's also a genuine shortage of housing in many desirable areas. Years of underbuilding have created a supply-demand imbalance that naturally pushes prices up. This doesn't make it any less painful for buyers, but it's a different dynamic to a purely credit-fueled bubble. However, even if the causes are somewhat different, the potential consequences of a significant housing market downturn remain deeply concerning. Section 6, the precarious paycheck, an anxious time for American workers. Let's turn our attention to the folks who actually do the work, American employees. For a long time, the headlines might have trumpeted low unemployment figures, making it seem like everyone who wanted a job had one, and all was well in the land of opportunity. But scratch beneath the surface, and a more complicated and frankly more worrying picture emerges in mid-2025. We're seeing signs of a softening labor market. For instance, weekly jobless claims, which is a measure of how many people are newly filing for unemployment benefits, recently rose to 240,000. That's a nudge upwards. A little tap on the shoulder saying, psst, things might be getting a bit wobbly here. Beyond the headline numbers, there's a pervasive feeling of job insecurity. Even if people are employed, there's a gnawing anxiety about how long that job will last. Are wages keeping pace with the rampant inflation we discussed earlier? For many, the answer is a resounding, don't make me laugh. Pay rises, if they come at all, are often swallowed whole by the rising cost of living, meaning people are working just as hard, if not harder, for effectively less money. It's like running faster and faster on a treadmill, only to find you're slowly sliding backwards. Then there's the rise of the gig economy and precarious work. Now, proponents will tell you it's all about flexibility and being your own boss. But for many others, it's a euphemism for juggling multiple low-paid jobs with no benefits, no sick pay, no holiday pay, and the constant fear that the work could dry up tomorrow. This kind of employment can mask underlying weaknesses in the job market. Sure, the unemployment rate might look okay, but if a significant chunk of that employment is insecure and poorly paid, it's hardly a sign of a thriving economy. This constant uncertainty takes a huge psychological toll. The stress of not knowing if you can pay the bills next month, the anxiety of potential layoffs, the inability to plan for the future. These things weigh heavily on individuals and families. Section 7, Sector Shakedown, Tech Tremors, Retail Rumbles, and Factory Funk. It's not just a general economic malaise, specific sectors are feeling the pinch in rather acute ways. Let's start with the tech industry. For years, big tech was the golden child of the American economy, a seemingly unstoppable engine of growth and innovation. But lately, the kombucha taps seem to be running a bit dry. We've seen waves of layoffs, hiring freezes, and a general sense that the go-go growth era is, if not over, then certainly taking a very long tea break. Then there's the retail sector. Your friendly neighborhood high street, or what's left of it, is facing a barrage of challenges. Online shopping continues to reshape consumer habits, which is tough enough. But add in rampant inflation, which crunches household budgets and reduces discretionary spending, and you've got a recipe for trouble. People are thinking twice before buying that new pair of trainers or that fancy coffee machine. This means fewer sales, tighter margins for retailers, and inevitably store closures and job losses. It's a tough time to be selling anything that isn't strictly essential, like, say, oxygen or very strong coffee. And let's not forget manufacturing. The dream of Made in America is a noble one, but it faces significant headwinds. Supply chains, while perhaps not as chaotically snarled as they were a couple of years ago, still present challenges. The cost of raw materials and energy can be volatile. And then there are trade policies. For instance, the U.S. effective tariff rate is currently around 14.5%, its highest level in 90 years. While tariffs might be intended to protect domestic industries, they can also increase costs for manufacturers who rely on imported components, and potentially lead to retaliatory tariffs from other countries, making exports more expensive. It's a complex web, and not a particularly relaxing one for factory owners. Section 8, King Dollar's Crown Slips, America's Economic Aura on the Wane. For the longest time, the US dollar has been the undisputed king of global currencies. Most international trade has been conducted in dollars, and countries around the world hold vast reserves of dollars. This reserve currency status has given the US enormous economic and geopolitical advantages. It meant America could borrow more cheaply, and it gave it a certain financial clout on the world stage. But, and there's always a but, isn't there? Cracks are beginning to appear in King Dollar's shiny crown. The sheer size of the US national debt, which we've already touched upon, is one factor causing jitters. Persistent economic instability like the kind we're discussing now doesn't exactly inspire confidence either. Other major economies and blocks of countries are increasingly exploring ways to trade in their own currencies or to create alternatives to the dollar-dominated system. It's not happening overnight, but the whispers are getting louder. So what if the dollar's dominance does start to fade? Well, it wouldn't be a catastrophe of biblical proportions immediately, but it would have significant consequences. For starters, it could become more expensive for the US government and American businesses to borrow money. If global demand for dollars decreases, the value of the dollar could fall, making imports more expensive and potentially reducing American purchasing power on the global stage. It would also mean a reduction in that aforementioned geopolitical influence that comes with controlling the world's primary currency. This isn't just about currency exchange rates, it's part of a broader narrative about America's changing position in the global economy. Section 9, Red Alert, Washington, dodging the 2026 recession bullet. So let's quickly recap the good cheer we've spread so far. The US economy decided to shrink a bit at the start of the year. Inflation is behaving like a kleptomaniac squirrel, hoarding all your purchasing power. The housing market is giving everyone vertigo. Job security feels as stable as a unicyclist on a tightrope during an earthquake. Key sectors are experiencing their own special brands of misery. And the US dollar might be losing some of its global swagger. All in all, it's not exactly a picture of robust health, is it? It's more like an economic patient looking a bit green around the gills and complaining of ominous rumbling sounds. Now, this isn't just an academic exercise in doom-mongering for the fun of it. The very real concern is that if these trends continue, if these warning signs are ignored, the US could be sleepwalking into a severe recession in 2026. And a recession isn't just a headline, it's lost jobs, failed businesses, and real hardship for millions of people. This is the point where policymakers need to stop bickering about whose fault it is and actually, what kind of something, you ask? Well, I'm not going to pretend I have all the answers neatly packaged in a PowerPoint presentation, but the general idea involves smart, decisive action. The key is to be proactive, not reactive. Waiting until the house is fully ablaze before calling the fire brigade is generally considered a poor strategy.